Today, I'm joined by Henek Lo. Henek is the co-founder and CEO of Hype Asia, the venture builder, helping high-growth startups expand into Asia. After overseeing the growth of Airbnb as well as WeWork in Asia, Henek talks about how startups can build their strategies to enable growth and how to prepare themselves for the challenges within the APAC region. We are also getting an in-depth look at what a venture builder is and how you might be able to leverage one.
I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, be sure to subscribe and consider leaving us a review and sharing it with your friends.
Welcome to another episode of In Your Best Interest, your personal finance podcast. I'm your host, Philipp Müller, and today we will be learning about venture building and entrepreneurship. We already heard from many different entrepreneurs as well as venture capitalists on the prior podcasts, so today's topic will fit right in as venture building is often misunderstood or not yet much talked about. Yet it can help startups grow their business significantly. For that, I have invited to the show Henek Lo. Henek is a co-founder and CEO of the venture builder called Hype. Henek was previously part of the first landing team to expand WeWork into the APAC region in 2016 as a general manager for Asia ex-China, launching 5 locations in Australia, Hong Kong, and South Korea. Previous to WeWork, Henek was a GM for Greater China at Airbnb and part of its 2012 landing team that started Airbnb operations in Asia through setting up the Singapore hub. In his various roles with Airbnb, Henek helped grow Airbnb's presence in the region and oversaw the hypergrowth of the company. At the start of his career, Henek worked at Bear Stearns, JP Morgan, and Macquarie, departing as VP in sales trading, where he serviced large institutions and funds that traded in APAC. He holds a bachelor degree in civil engineering from Carnegie Mellon University in the United States. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, Henek.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Thanks for having me.
It's really great to have you. There's a lot of common interests and also people that I know at Airbnb that have talked very highly of you when I was doing my research for this podcast today. So very excited to have you on today. And as I mentioned to you before offline, what we really try to do is get to know our podcast guest a little bit more detail. So if I may, I know I kind of gave a lot of background already, but we can dive a lot deeper, right? I think what was life for Henek growing up before all this?
Yeah. I guess before my career even started, I'm actually born and raised from Hong Kong. I've lived here and studied here all the way till I was in high school. And I left to the US when I was quite young, around 14. That's why I sound American, I guess. It's been, I spent about 9 years there in the US. And then I came back to Asia and Hong Kong around 2007, early 2007. I had actually just graduated from university, and then that was right around when the financial crisis hit. I was on my way back trying to look for a job, but that was a really, really tough time. So even for, I took, I guess, the quote unquote corporate route, after my school, and I went into banking and all that. But it wasn't really an easy journey even during that time because, if you guys remember Lehman and Bear Stearns, which was one of my first banks, by the way, that went down spectacularly at that time, and it was a lot to digest. And I think that kind of set me off on a route of my career, but more importantly, also helped me, I guess, at the end of my corporate route, think about why I want to go into entrepreneurship, but we can go into that a little bit more later.
No, super interesting. So then, okay, so you're at Bear Stearns. It's 2008 financial crisis. You worked through it, kept your job, I assume, and
yes.
What was happening?
At the time, I think most of my career, I was never really prepared for things that I was meant to do. So I was a civil engineer, as you had mentioned just now, and I used to like to build things in college. We obviously civil engineering. I like to build cars, and then I came back to Hong Kong and I realized that all those things that I wanted to do didn't really exist as a career out in Asia, right? Hong Kong, Singapore, very similar, right? Small financial centers, very densely populated, and I realized that if I really wanted to be an engineer, I'd be this age now before I got all my licenses and everything. So I thought that I would go from engineering to building skyscrapers, but that's a very long process to get there. So I was at Bear Stearns and finally getting into my finance job, and I think I knew very little about trading. So I was in equity trading. I was always on a trading desk. And if any of you guys have seen any of the Wall Street movies, the trading floor is a very vibrant and very exciting place. People yelling, things are being thrown around. There are a lot of TVs and screens and action. I think that was really what attracted me to that. But lo and behold, unfortunately, after just 9 months of Bear Stearns, getting into Bear Stearns was like, getting into like an Ivy League school. It's one of those top investment banks that I'm finally here, right? And then 9 months later, I remember it was Monday morning at 5 a.m. I used to go to work at 5:30 a.m. because we covered Australia. And I got my call from my boss, and he said, "Hey, you need to drop everything you're doing and come in now." And I was a analyst on the desk, and they needed my help. So I ran in, and halfway on the taxi, I was checking my BlackBerry, and I realized that the one of the headlines was Bear Stearns sold to JP Morgan for $2.
Yeah. That must have been an interesting feeling and day, right? When you get that message.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, I didn't really know how to interpret that. I mean, it was very early in my career. I didn't really know what was going on, so I was just a bit confused. And anyway, I just went in, and at 5:30 a.m., the whole floor was already mad. There were so many people there, ringing phones, people calling, clients shouting, and that was when I knew this was not a normality. It was actually a beginning of a meltdown. So after a couple weeks from that day, finally had a chat with my MD at the time. He told me, he's like, "Hey, it seems like this whole operations is gonna wind down, and we're going to face our new owner, which is JP Morgan." So from there, I guess a bit of luck, a bit of meeting the right people. But there was, I believe, close to 500 people in the Bear Stearns Hong Kong office at the time, and only 30 of us made it over to JP Morgan. And I was one of them, actually. And I always kind of joke around my ex-colleagues to see now I was young, I was cheap, and I was available. So people took me on, but jokes aside, I was very lucky. I went to JP Morgan, and I went to my second job, which is the algorithmic trading desk. At the time, basically, it means that it is programs and algorithm programs are trading the market on behalf of the clients. So it was a very, I guess, a slightly newer product at the time in 2008 or 9. And actually, fast forward 11 years from now it's a very popular product because algorithmic trading is applied to equities, over-the-counter, even cryptocurrency, right? It's using a lot of algorithmic trading. So that was my second job back into JP Morgan.
Oh, super interesting. Yeah. So no, it's good to hear your experience of this because we had some people on before, talking about their experience of the 2008 financial crisis. So it's good to hear different points of view. It was an interesting time. I remember I was at State Street in Munich.
Oh wow, got it. So you definitely
we were doing structured products, right? So that entire team is actually not there anymore, and it was it was definitely interesting time, but also an incredible amount of learnings coming out of this. If you were in it, right? If you're really in it, you have a very different perspective on how that all shaped out to be. But so investment banking, how do you make the switch then into a startup scene by joining Airbnb as their first employee in Asia? That seems like a big leap and a lot of networking, because how do you even make that, it's Airbnb already in the US, because I think, what time was that? What year was this?
This is late 2011, early 2012.
So I was in the US actually at that point in time, and they were already getting quite the notoriety over there. So how were you able to make that switch? Because I think there's a lot of people who obviously are like intrigued by technology and startups, but getting that switch done seems always a very difficult task, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just now, what I had mentioned about the financial crisis in 2008 left a lasting impact on me. And actually, if I thought about what my career was going, I was going quite fast. I was getting promoted quite quickly, and I was a VP by the time I was 27 in Macquarie, 28. And the reason for that was because there was so much movement in the industry. Not necessarily, I don't think, because I did super, super well, but there were just a lot of movements, meaning that people were getting dropped or getting sacked at the time. So, a lot of younger folks had to step up to take on more. So I really appreciated that opportunity no matter what. All the people that I met during those days, I still keep in touch with a lot of them. But I think that has always left a lasting impact where I was at Bear Stearns, I remember in your first job, you're supposed to, everything is rosy, it's going, you're supposed to learn and do stuff. But then I saw people left the offices with like boxes, carrying the personal belongings. And I think I was like, okay, this is kind of what a corporate job means. Like it's very macro driven, right? If things are good, going well, all these corporates kind of flourish, you flourish with it. But if it's not going so well, then you might be mid 40s and late 40s, and you have to look for another job or thing. So I almost didn't want that to happen to myself, I think. And when I was on my second year at Macquarie, and you asked me how I made the switch. I think the first step was I actually quit my job. I didn't have Airbnb or anything like that. I just quit. It was one day I remember, I think shortly after Facebook IPO'd in 2010, if I'm correct.
Yep.
But so shortly after that, and because that was a very lasting impact to me, because I was the generation that Facebook used to be only for schools. You used to be able to see Facebook in your school. Like if you're in a high school, you said you belong to this school and you have Facebook. And then suddenly it became cross schools, and then suddenly it became the whole world, and then everybody's on Facebook, right?
Yeah,
and then
that was actually pretty amazing. Looking back at this now, because I remember being in school in the Netherlands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, that was the first time we had, university was the first time that we got, introduced to it.
And that was fascinating to me because it IPO'd at $100 billion, right? I mean, $100 billion now seems, relatively norm. Like, you have huge unicorns and decacorns, but back then it was huge, like really big news, especially on the equity floors. And I just slowly started reading all the research about Facebook and seeing the power of their advertising, seeing kind of where they're going. And that really kind of set off like a new trajectory for myself in terms of, okay, this is what tech is all about, and I need to kind of get a sense of how to get into this industry per se, right? And then so I left, and then I went to San Francisco. I met some friends, and actually Airbnb, as you mentioned and pointed out, was a really good friend of mine referred these folks called Airbnb to me. They're like, hey, I think you should go meet these guys. They're just starting. And back then, there was not a lot of startup news. So I remember I was like reading through everything on TechCrunch. So long story short, I met them, and finally, actually, I had to interview for 15 rounds to get into Airbnb. And here's the funny thing, right? I remember going to San Francisco. I was about to meet the founders for my final interview. Airbnb is a very it's a very culture-driven company, right? So even at that point where there was 200 plus people, the founders insisted to meet most of the leaders of different regions, right? I was going in at the time to lead Asia. So I flew over for a day and a half. I walked in. I was already blown away by the office, right? Going from a corporate office to like a startup office, I was like, wow. I remember this very clearly.
I've been to the one in Singapore many times. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, and that was like already, I would say, a slightly nicer office, right? But even back in the day, it was a little bit more raw, where there was like a little piece of a plane in there. There was like a half a plane in there. There was like 8 ping pong tables. Like people, it was a Sunday and people were working and listening to music. I think I just really liked the energy. And so, after talking to, even though it was a very long interview process, every conversation I've had with the European leaders, all the different parts of America, some of the other parts of Asia and Australia, who they've hired somebody already, I just realized that everybody had a very keen sense of solving this problem, right? They were very mission driven, and everybody was saying the same thing. And that was very refreshing because, yourself being in finance, I remember at finance, like when 5 p.m. hits, everybody was at the bar kind of just kind of complaining about the day, right? It was a lot of things happening, but that was a bit of the culture, and it was really refreshing where I'm talking to a bunch of young, very driven individuals that all had a vision of how to make Airbnb come true. And look at where it's been 8 years later. And so again, I think a majority luck that I got into Airbnb, but I also took a huge leap of faith for myself in my career standpoint. I took almost a 65% pay cut to go there.
And that's very interesting for listeners as well, right? That it's not just, sometimes you need to take that leap of faith, right?
Yeah, correct.
And, long term, it hopefully pays off, right? In your case, I assume there were probably some stock options that are now becoming something because the stock price is doing quite well after the IPO this year. But that's kind of what you're banking on, right? So you're hoping that, that venture will turn out to be the one to pay for the differences in pay along the way. But let me take one step back. You just mentioned leap of faith, right? And what I wanted to ask you is, what was your family situation like at the time? And if you had family, what did your wife or a partner or a spouse say? Or if you didn't yet, what was like, especially coming, from a family, you did engineering, you had a really good job in finance, right? What was their support like or not?
This is hitting close to home, so I guess I hope my wife doesn't listen to this. But it was really interesting. I think during the end of my banking career, I think my parents saw that I wanted more, and just to be very frank as well, I grew up in middle class kind of family in Hong Kong. My dad was an entrepreneur himself. Had very little education, but then he had like a lot of grit and hard work, and just got his electronics business off the ground. But actually, when I was 16, he had a bit of a health issue, and also ran into some issues with his business. So he wrapped it up, when I was 16. I'm kind of glad that you asked this question, because I never really had a chance to reflect on this. But when that happens, and when I was younger, you see all the changes that happen in the family, right? When my dad was wrapping up his business and all the different relationships he had at work, and the people, there's a lot of change to the family, right? We suddenly went from, I guess, a slightly more comfortable way of living to uncomfortable living, and I think that leaves a lasting impact on me, and that's why everybody, and later before I started Hype, I can also tell you why this is important, because everybody says that, oh, entrepreneurship is so cool, you go and you run and you do great things, but very little people talk about all the blow-ups and the failures, right? And I think when you see and witness that within your family, that kind of leaves some different motivations in like how I pursued my career. So during, I guess, for my family, when they heard about Airbnb, definitely dubious to say the least.
Some weird US business wanting to come to Asia, right?
No, I mean, even the worst was I then told them what it was about. Oh yeah, we're gonna help strangers stay in other people's homes, and I just remember this look on my mom's face. Just like she was blank, like she didn't know what to really say about that. She was like, "Are you sure this is going to work?" I was like, "You know what? I think so." There's these investors called Sequoia and DST. I didn't know anything about venture capital at the time, but obviously they're giants in the industry. They invested, and I did my research. They seem very dependable. But anyway, I'm going to go for it. And then so. Actually, there's a great story here, because even though after I went for it, 4 months after I joined Airbnb, we had to relocate to Singapore, which is now the office that you see there, right? I was actually originally working in Hong Kong. So I had very little time. First of all, I changed my job. I took a 65% pay cut. I had just started dating my girlfriend, who's my wife now at the time, and then suddenly I had to move to Singapore. And then they're like, "Wait, this is way too much, too many changes to your career. Are you sure this is okay?" And then I think at some point, I was in Singapore, and actually the fun story here is a few of the guys that moved with us from Hong Kong to Singapore. We actually lived in the office for like 2 months. Because we didn't have our EPs fast enough yet in Singapore to rent housing. So we ended up sleeping in the conference room. But that is like the best experience. Now I look back, it was the best experience where yes, Airbnb was very successful in the US, but in Asia it was just starting. And the founders really instilled a bit of a scrappiness in us. It's like, hey, if we can make things work, by as little resources possible, do it. And I literally experienced that, right? Just from in a slightly very well-paid banking job to sleeping in a conference room in Singapore in one of our first shop house offices was definitely a shocking experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but that's I guess that's how good things happen. You kind of have to go through the bad first, and then you see the good. And not to mention even COVID last year, and all the way to Airbnb's IPO at the end of the year, it's also a roller coaster, to say the least.
It is a roller coaster, but it's kind of like life, right? Like a startup or a business in general is kind of like life, right? You go through the ups and downs, and you hope that there's more ups than downs, and you come through them. And I think that's the key. And I think, well, thank you so much for sharing this with about your family. So I think it's very, very interesting, very relatable, probably to a lot of listeners. But yeah, so a lot of hard work and grittiness, I think, like you said, is really, really important. So you're at Airbnb now, and this is part of venture building almost, right? And we still have a little bit to get there, but I think this is probably where your first experience with this is as well, right? So there's a company from the US, has no idea what to do in Asia, asking people to let's help us do it. What was that process like, and like how did you guys do over the years? Obviously, now looking back, I guess good, but
yeah, I mean, it's the funny thing is that I look back, I don't think the efforts or the things that we did was all that glamorous, right? It was very, very kind of grassroots, right? We at the time we had the sales team that I was heading up. That was how I got into it. And it's kind of weird when you think about sales in Airbnb. It's like, what are you actually selling? But we were actually pushing the platform and introducing the platform to people who were doing property management or people who were interested in kind of opening their own homes. In Asia is a little bit different because the things that we have to be conscious of is that in the US, you can have a house, and in some cases, people have guest houses, right? It's like a whole different house that's within their property. Or like, if you have an apartment or two as an investment, people will open those and actually start renting those out. In Asia, not a lot of people enjoy that amount of space. We live in very dense areas, dense kind of cities. I think Japan and Hong Kong probably even more dense than somewhere like Singapore, which is crazy to think about it because these are small places, right, in terms of cities. So we really had to think about what made it work for Airbnb specifically. So I think at the very beginning, the usual suspects were expats who traveled a lot. And I think the reason why we picked Hong Kong, Singapore, out of these major countries to kind of expand into in the early days is because it was much easier to convince these people who are traveling a lot, or they may have one or two investment properties around the region to kind of opening up to let people rent. So really, it was just educating people of the platform. Second, I think the most interesting thing is like before Airbnb, the closest thing was probably Craigslist. Before that, right? I don't think where people actually list, I'm not sure you remember this or back home in Netherlands for you, if people looked for roommates on Craigslist. When I was in college, people looked for
That's a
roommates.
very American thing, yeah. But when I was living in America, everyone used it in the early 2000s, right? It's a very, very normal thing. I mean, I think the only other thing that comes close to the Airbnb at the time, maybe it was later even,
Couchsurfing.
Couch surfing, right? Exactly.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Couchsurfing. And so you look at these two different platforms, well, not really platforms, but like Couchsurfing is like more of a place to meet people and then you can go sleep on their couch. Craigslist is just basically an online forum board that people are just trading comments. So they both are good, but then didn't offer a lot of protection, right? So at the time when we came to Asia, we also had to think about the trust and credibility angle. So one of the first things that we did back in 2012 was bring the host insurance from the US to Asia. That was a huge thing, right? To actually be able to cover all the countries in Asia under one platform. And the trust and safety in Airbnb, I must say, is really good. And obviously, there are many unfortunate incidents that probably got Airbnb to wise up and think about how to tackle these things. But our job at the time in Asia was really make sure that those things, that people are aware, that we have all these protection in place, that it's safe community online to rent out these their own listings and their own property. And I think lastly, it was just really kind of normalizing the efforts of home sharing or like living in other people's homes. So a big part of what we did in Asia was actually push for people to travel on Airbnb, not necessarily to host on Airbnb first. And I think that's a very powerful network effect for Airbnb. The minute you travel on it, and the first time I did it was when I went to go meet the founders in San Francisco back in early 12, I believe. And I was in the middle of mission, my first time in San Francisco. And I went into the house and the host had a whole list of things that I could do. He said, "Hey, if you're hungry, there's a Burger King right around there." Quite it's a handwritten note, right? I think it's a college student or someone who's just started their careers or started working. And that was really cool. I got to see the city in a whole different way. But the minute I left, then the thought came up, said, "Hey, I can do this too." Right? This is how it works. So the point here is that the way to get Asian Airbnb users or hosts to actually be a little bit more comfortable with the platform is to get them to travel first. So a big part of our efforts was really kind of getting the outbound travel done. And then obviously there are a lot of great locations and destinations in Asia as well. Like vacation rental, like Phuket or Bali. Yeah. People love those places. You can rent amazing villas on there. So really finding...
It's just the perfect right place, right time, right?
Correct. Finding the right behavior and matching that to the region that we were in at the time, which is Asia.
No, it's awesome. Great story. You're at Airbnb. Everything is going really, really well. Why did you leave?
I was going to get married. I think that was the easiest way to think about it because I was heading up Greater China at the time, and I was traveling to Beijing frequently. I was there almost for two and a half years, just traveling back and forth in Beijing. I was in the middle of, Beijing actually back in 2013 was one of the worst times of the air pollution. So it was, and I actually have a little bit of a sensitive airway. So my wife would see me come back. Well, actually, my girlfriend at the time would see me come back from China, and I'll be coughing, and I was like, I had no idea what it would do to me, by the way. And actually, it left. The air was kind of so bad that I had a bit of asthma in 16 and 7. It was bad, right? So anyway, it was very hard to convince my wife to move there. And I think more importantly, she had a career in Hong Kong at the time. So actually, my wife and I met in the bank.
Okay.
when I was still there. So I went the ventures route and did startups and all that. She stayed in banking. She's still there. So I think we both wanted to start a family and all that stuff, and we thought Hong Kong was still the best place for it. So I mean, obviously being one of the first guys in Asia for Airbnb, I knew the founders, I knew everybody very well. I just told them straight up, said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing, and this is why I need to move back to Hong Kong." And unfortunately, Airbnb didn't have an office in Hong Kong, so I couldn't, go back there. So even though it was really good, I was lucky because some common investors that I spoke to at the time then told me about WeWork. Hey, there's this other company, and they're looking for someone just like you to help them land in Asia. And with your experience in Airbnb, you really should come and entertain it. Very, I guess, similar kind of ride, crazy one. They've been the first group of in Asia. I met Newman back in 2016 in Hong Kong when he was out here to look at the market and all that stuff. And long story short, I was like, okay, you guys are gonna set up a regional headquarters in Hong Kong. I'm in. Then I'm in WeWork, and I'm also back to Hong Kong. But I actually went there thinking that I would travel less because the headquarters is in Hong Kong. I actually ended up traveling way more because real estate business and Airbnb is just different, right? When you're opening a building that has 10 floors over 100,000 square feet, we just had to be near the building every time before it opened just to make sure everything was okay.
Yeah, no, we for StashAway, we were actually for 2 years we were actually in WeWork offices in Singapore. So we were in the very first one in Singapore on Beach Road. No, but so we could kind of see how much time it takes, right, to set these up in terms of training and doing things right and things going wrong at first. But no, super interesting experience then, right? Going from Airbnb, you go to WeWork, and after that, we're in today's company called Hype, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's where I want to spend some time with, because I think for most people that are not, too much aware of this venture building business, what that is, can you share a little bit about, about Hype itself, but then also, while doing that, what a venture builder actually is?
Yeah. So I'll start with what the company does, and maybe I'll go into the why I thought about starting this business in the first place. But a venture builder basically helps entrepreneurs, or we also help great startups to venture build into the region by expansion. Right, we help them just very similar to the career I had in tech. WeWork, Airbnb, all these different companies coming over. There's definitely a certain way to do it. And at the time, at this point, I'm still talking about everything pre-COVID, by the way. So at the time, there was a lot of companies. Venture capital was booming. A lot of companies wanted to get into Asia. So this was a very natural switch to me. And actually, I worked with an investor in Airbnb that had done very similar ways of working with Airbnb to expand them. And that was where the idea was seeded in my mind. And there was nobody in Asia to kind of fill that role or be that kind of expert in helping a lot of companies specialize in coming over. So today, Hype, we work with a lot of companies that do that, both on just a consulting basis, and we also do what we call the build, operate, and transfer, what we call a bot, where we second ourselves, where we lend ourselves into the company and basically lead an initiative. And so that was how I ended up being able to work with great companies like Carousel, Goat, SnapAss, just to name a few, in the region to help them expand. And on the side, actually, together with that expansion business, we also then invest into these companies, have equity stakes in these companies, and create different deal structures to work for them. So, for example, if you want to go to China and you want to have a China JV, like a local structure to invest in China, for example, a lot of companies think about this because China is a very different market. Mm-hmm. Requires a massive amount of capital, and those are the things that we set up for them. Yeah, so that's the what we do in Hype.
Oh, it's super interesting. And just to get back to what I asked you at the beginning, so you go through investment banking, making good money, taking a pay cut to go to tech startups, to then going out on your own and potentially not taking any kind of pay for a year or so. How was that?
It was this was what I mentioned about a little bit of what my family and my family background kind of does to me. I had responsibilities. I had to look after my own family. I had to take care of
Yeah.
my parents. Like I couldn't be as cowboy as I wanted to be, right? And then what I mean by cowboy is like, just go no pay, work on something for 18 months, grind through it, and I had a kid coming. My wife was pregnant at the time, so when I thought about the why, it was really just looking at a couple of things. One, life. Two, whether or not I had the perfect idea to like, this is what I'm going to dedicate my life to. And three, just like, how do these things kind of gel and balance together, right? With my life, as I said, baby coming, got to take care, got bills to pay, got people to take care of. I needed to do something that has a revenue stream, right? That would be paid for what I did, right? Second, being in startups, just being a pure consulting or like just cash wasn't really good enough for me, because equity was a big part of the venture cycle, right?
And you never know when that pays out, though, right? Like you said, so we're in 2021, and obviously the Airbnb portion just got out into the public markets, right?
Yeah, correct. And that was 9 years. I joined in 2012, so that was a very long run. So even to this point, was I willing to do another company that potentially would lead me to like an quote unquote Airbnb type of success? And if I was 25, yes, but now 11 years older, I wouldn't necessarily take that as my first choice. So Hype was a perfect blend of that, where I could keep doing what I do best, which is help companies operate, build businesses, and actually materialize in a new region. But at the same time, we charge fees. There's a sweat equity. We invest into warrants and stuff like that for these type of companies. It allowed me to remain relevant, as well as the learning experiences in Hype was actually very, very good. Like in the last 3 years, we worked with almost 40 startups now. We've consulted for maybe 25. We've built 10, and we advise for like maybe 5 of them, right? And what I mean by building 10 is like when Carousel, Singapore's darling, as you guys also before, when they came to Hong Kong, it was a quick blitz of 6 to 9 months to help them realize the business, hire their team, get business metrics up. But on the flip side, where I don't talk about a lot, I learned so much more about that industry, right? It's like, oh, this is what online classified means. This is how you guys are kind of outpacing traditional competitors such as like eBay or like other classified sites and stuff like that. And like, I learned a lot. So the second thing, which is, if I didn't have the perfect idea to build, the next best thing was really absorbing and soaking as much as possible about how other people, great founders, great CEOs, great entrepreneurs, are starting their business. And actually, after 2020, COVID aside and all that stuff, I now am getting much closer to know exactly what I want to build within Hype as well. And I think that was a process that helped me get there. So even fintech, 2018 ICOs, if you remember, we worked with so many of those companies. Crypto obviously exploding the last, much more in 18, 19, a little bit calmer in 20, and now, voila, just 2 days ago, Bitcoin is like a new story now. So just learning about all these things equipped me with, okay, this is how different industry works. This is how fintech works. This is what health tech works. This is what these guys are doing, and that gave me a lot of ideas and inspiration to do what I want to do next.
No, I think a couple of things for the listeners. I think to listen out there, what you just mentioned is definitely, even while you work, right, you can use that job to get inspiration. You can, do research, but having the hunger to look for new things and diving deep into them, I think is a very, very good way to start and understand what you really want to do. Is there business model and things like that? I think that's a very, very great lesson that you shared here with everyone. That can, if you really have the hunger to do that, everyone can spend some time on that, aside from work, before really taking that plunge into the deep end to make that change. So no, that's super interesting. And so basically, if you say now, like, and you've been in this space, for a while now, where do you see markets for startups to expand right now into some of the best ones? Like, if I'm a startup in Singapore, where should I look to next? If I'm a startup in Indonesia, or in Europe even, right? Where do you see growth? Obviously, my experience, I grew up in Europe, lived in the US for almost 11, 12 years, and now in Asia for the last almost 5.5 years. I feel like obviously the buzz and the positivity and towards the future is so much greater in Southeast Asia than it is currently, I feel, in Europe or in the US. But what is your point of view? And where do you suggest companies that ask you for countries to expand to?
Yeah, I mean, it is in my company's name, right? Hype Asia, and
Yep.
and the reason for that is because I do think well, if we consider the short term, but potentially 5 to 10 years for like markets to develop, there's so many different countries that are just starting from grassroots. There's a lot more greenfield out here, almost, it seems. But I must say that the reason why I also exist is because it's very fragmented. It's so complicated to get into Asia, right? If you have Facebook, Google, Instagram, and you're in the US, you can pretty much use English to go to most countries in Europe. Just on a single platform, and you can kind of tap into growth. In Asia, you can kind of get there too, but there's a lot of intricate details and all that stuff that you need to pay attention to before going. So one thing I'll hugely caveat here is that I would have answered this question very differently pre-COVID and now post-COVID. I think it's something
we are in COVID though, right? We have to deal with it. Yeah,
correct. So what I mean by that is, I think a lot when venture capital was booming, a lot of companies were looking to set up teams in Asia, left and right, just opening offices, making sure they blitz into them. I think my first observation post-COVID is that that capital or that kind of expansion efforts have really slowed down quite a bit. And ironically, a lot of great CEOs have been talking to us to expand by proxy, meaning because we have a way to second ourselves or second our great operators in our team into these new startups to help them build out. So a lot of them actually talk to us because even simple things like the CEO can't even fly over to like a new country in Asia to check out the market. They have to look for people that they know has done this before and do all that. So we've been helping and talking to a lot of companies about doing that. So, but in terms of markets, as you said, I think the general things to pay attention to, Singapore and Hong Kong are always great hubs for different parts of Asia, right? Singapore, obviously, great hub for Southeast Asia, though a little expensive, but I think the talent that you get are a lot more cross border. They can go into different countries. A lot of them are of a Malaysian and Indonesian background, for example, right? Also in Singapore. So by talent wise, you can tap into a lot of those markets from there. Hong Kong, the same thing, right? Greater China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, and I would say the slightly more the most difficult markets, I guess, in my view, is still Japan and Korea, just because of the way that you do business there. So, one fun fact I've been looking a lot of research on, like food delivery in Japan, the penetration is only 8%.
It's low, yeah.
It's tiny. But if you look at every other country that has adopted, Deliveroo, Food Panda, Uber Eats, and all that stuff, it's just mind-boggling that a very developed and sort of international country, very international, but actually it's very hard to do business there internationally. So, if you spoke English, it's very hard to do business in Japan, and things just move a certain pace there, right? So, I would say, and the last part I'll insert here is China. I would say back in 2013 and 14, when we were looking into it, we were right after Facebook and Google. Right, in terms of foreign companies going to China, and as everybody knows, Facebook and Google entering China was a bit of a boogeyman story because they didn't fare very well in those markets, and there was a lot of learnings there. So the second kind of wave was ourselves, Airbnb, and as well as Uber. We were also breaking into China at the same time. So I would say that even compared to 2013 in 2021, this year, I think it's much easier as a foreign business to do business in China, to get in. There's a lot of, like, for example, we worked with Go, right? There's a lot of cross-border programs that Tencent, Alibaba, all these guys facilitate in order for foreign companies to tap in. So my point here is that I think this year, it's actually much easier for foreign companies to start thinking about China on a just an operation and execution basis. But in terms of strategy, I will definitely not recommend going to China if you don't have like a 5-year vision for that market and for that country. It really is a long build, but then the rewards are also significant if you unlock that market as well.
Yeah, big rewards. Big not necessarily risk, but it's a very competitive market. So I think I read the book of what's his name? He started Google in China. Can't remember his name. I'll put it in the show notes below. Yes, exactly, Kylie. Good book, very, very good book, and he shares some great stories about how the competitive landscape there. And
he's an alumni from Carnegie Mellon, which I went to, so he's one of the guys I really follow. Super smart.
Really, really smart, and really, really interesting if you want to learn more about startups in China, for sure. So with that being said, we have so much more to talk about. I know we also wanted to talk a little bit more about investments and investing and startups. So we'll do that in a follow-up podcast for the listeners.
Thank you for having me.
One other thing I wanted to ask you though today is, what are some of the trends that you're looking at that you're getting really excited about over the next 5 years? Like, is there anything, is it crypto or like, is it something completely different? What are you looking at that really excites you and say, oh, I really want to see how this develops?
I think two spaces. I think one, crypto has always been very interesting to me because I used to be a trader. And actually understanding, such as yourself, you were in State Street as well. And when I was looking at this, instrument per se called cryptocurrency, I think the long-term normalization of this currency is probably imminent. But I do think it's a little bit early. So, I can't expect to go spend Bitcoin at a convenience store to pay for something, right? I don't think but I think on an investment basis, it's definitely just like good traders or good investors do, you have to have an allocation for it, right? You should allocate a little bit of your portfolio to that because I think it's the new gold. Is the new kind of instrument to hold value per se, and the volume is significant. Institutional players are getting in. I'm still shocked at the price. Don't get me wrong. But it definitely seems like it's happening. Second thing is probably a little bit less exciting than it might seem, but also I think it's a huge trend, which is D2C, direct to consumer. I think previously, pre-COVID, there was already a lot of these brands coming out, right? But I think a lot of entrepreneurs I meet now all understand and think about, okay, instead of starting my business on a platform, like go sell stuff on Amazon or go sell stuff on these different large kind of e-com platforms, they can reach the customers themselves. And secondly, I do think a lot of customers now, where you kind of really now is the time where millennials are starting to work, they're coming into the workforce. They don't necessarily go to Amazon to discover new products, right? They have so many different channels to do that. And I think this is the prime time for a lot of those companies, with a huge boost from COVID, by the way. I think year on year, e-com spend has grown at least 30+%. One of the biggest growth as it experienced a long time, just because of behavior. People have to buy groceries now. You can't go out to eat so much anymore. But there's a lot of color in the market that says that this behavior is gonna stay. Retail stores are gonna dwindle also because of COVID. A lot of people are closing down their retail and kind of shifting that experience to be majority online. And I think like how good trends always go retro, this is like one of the retro trends that we're going into, like e-com 4.0 now, where there's social e-com that people are, in China are selling on groups, chat groups, WeChat groups, and now all the way to just simple products being very targeted to their value proposition and be able to do very good in the market. Yeah.
So super interesting trends, and I think that's good for listeners if they want to do more research on those. We did have an episode with someone from crypto.com if you want to listen to that and learn a little bit more about cryptocurrencies. And then I will have Henek on for sure again. There's a lot more that we wanted to talk about that we didn't cover today. But Henek, to wrap it up, where can people find more about you, about Hype, if they want to reach out? Maybe they have businesses that are interested of taking abroad.
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so
Okay.
add me, ping me on LinkedIn, and then we can have a chat. But other than that, our website, there's also a way to reach out to us. But either one works.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Henek. We'll put those links also in the show notes. And for everyone else, I'm looking forward to another chat with Henek here soon. And thank you again for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for the show this week. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave us a review. The reviews really help us, and we love reading your comments as well. In Your Best Interest is hosted by me, Philipp Müller. We're produced by StashAway, and we're mixed by Mo Ramley. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notified whenever we have new content out for you. Also, don't forget to download the StashAway app. It's available in the Apple App Store as well as the Google Play Store, so you can start on your financial journey right now.